Hello, what's up guys, welcome to the 20th tutorial in series, the basics of programming with Python. Today we're going to talk about classes and objects, and the reason why we're going to be talking about objects is so that we can understand how classes work. Okay, so let's get into this video. So the first thing we want to do is I'm going to show you that different classes, well, basically objects, when you talk about objects things you see, things you can take, you can feel, things you can carry, your pen, your drives, stuff like that. You refer to them as objects. But in Python is mostly referred to as an object-oriented programming language. It is an object-oriented programming language, so everything in Python is an object. So the class of this boolean is an object, this string is an object, this integer is an object. So everything in Python is an object. But in this case everything is an object, but you can't do a dot upper. You know why? If I run that, you give him an error because an a is not a string. It has no attributes upper, so a is not a string and you cannot perform the upper on a. So you can only perform the upper on b because it's a string. So I'm going to explain why that is. As you can see, it's worked. So if I print type of a, and then I'll print down here, or better still, let me run that first. And if you see type of a is an object of class int, so it has its own attributes. The class of object of class int has different attributes it possesses. So as well as b is an object of class string str. Okay, so to be able to see the attribute, let's do .b. As you can see, b will contain the strip, the remove prefix, the find, the upper, the lower. So this object attributes doesn't pertain to an object of class integer. Okay, so based on your object, the class or the type of your object, you can perform some particular operations, just like you can perform operations of a string on a boolean. So you need to understand that different objects, you need to understand that different objects possess different attributes based on their type. Okay, so these attributes can also be variables, they can be methods, and they can be, we'll talk about that later anyways. So let me show you something. If I have print b dot, okay, let me just do b dot lower here, and I'm going to define a function called foo. I'm going to print lower. So as you can see, the way you call this, if I do foo, the way you call this foo is going to be different from the way you call this, because this is an attribute. In this case where you have dots lower and then parentheses, this is a method. But though is an attribute, we call it a method. So you need to understand that everything inside there is an attribute, but some are methods, some are variables, as I was saying earlier. We'll talk about that later. So when you say dot lower, this is a method and it's different from a function. The way you call it is different from the way you call a function. You don't call a function by saying dot foo, you call it by just call it foo, as you can see. Okay, let me save that. You got hello, and then we get this lower here, as you can see that. So they are both different things. So I hope you get that, because we're going to be talking about this. I'm going to mention this or reference it later. Now let's create a class of our one, and then I'll bring all I've explained to it from beginning to into it. Okay, so if I do class, we're going to create a class of the type dog. So you can put parentheses in front if you want, or you can leave it empty anyway. So we're going to print class of dog. So most times when you're creating classes, your classes should always start with capital letter. So although it can be small letter, but for Python, according to guidelines and stuff like that, you need to start with a capital letter. So we call it the camel case. So if you want to have dog names, you can do something like that. You understand what I'm saying anyway. So let's just get into it. So first I'm going to do is I'm going to define a class method. So as you can see, this is similar to a function, but it is not a function. So this is a method of a class. So whenever I see something like this is a method of a class, so don't worry about this. I'm going to explain this later. Let me finish writing the class and then I'm going to talk about this. We're going to do define back, and then we're going to call this self, okay, and then we're going to print woof. That's not spelling of woof. Oops. Okay, so now as you can see, this self here is just something that has to be in every class as an argument, a parameter that has to be in at the beginning of every class method. Okay, so your self must be and the self must be here. Just have to ignore it, except in special cases when you won't be using it. We won't be talking about that here. Okay, so now let's go back to this init. As you can see, this init is a special method. Anytime you see something double underscore, init double underscore, there are special methods in Python, and this init itself is called an initializer. It's used to start an object, so it's not necessarily defined, but I'll be defining it here to show you how it works. So even if you check here, if you see something like init, something here, init, I can't find. Okay, yeah, here it is. So init, yeah, so we have init here. So whenever you create the type of a string, I believe this is a string. Okay, yeah, attribute of a string. Whenever I create the type of a string, it actually runs this init method to define the string. Okay, so now in this case, whenever we call our dog class, it runs this function and then it does this. I'll talk about this in a minute. So before we go there, let me create an instance of a dog. So I'm gonna do dog, and then we have to put parentheses in order to call it. Okay, so we're gonna print dog. Okay, so I want to explain something to you. Now you see when you run this, you can see that our dog, the class of dog, the object of class of dog is actually at this place, at this location in our memory, in the memory of our system. So this is, as you can see, this is a class, this is an object. The class is an object. So I want you to see classes as a template, a blueprint to creating objects in Python. So whenever you create a class, you're writing a class is a way of creating different objects in Python. So you can create multiple objects of your class dog, basically. So you don't need to worry about it. This is just location in memory of the class. Okay, so as I explained earlier before this, referencing it, the way you call a method is different from the way you call a function. So the way you call this will not work outside of this. So if you try calling back, so it won't work outside of the scope of your class. So if you try calling it, let me cancel this. That would have returned something different. Okay, so if I call this, you see back is not defined. So the way you call this, it's a class method. So the way you call this is the name of the class and then dot back. So when you run this and so we should see woof, and where we getting on. Okay, so we didn't need to print it because we already have printing here already. Okay, so when we talk about functions, whenever a function is not returning anything and you try printing it, of course this is a method as well, so it can return something, but if it doesn't return something and you try printing it to return none, so that's the reason why we got that none down there. So if you don't understand that, just watch my video on functions, you understand better. Okay, now let's save and run that. Save I do dog.back, it prints woof. Okay, cool. So now you understand that. Now let me come back to this. In Python, this is a global variable. So sorry, in this class is a global variable. So this variable is only is accessible to every method in this class and to this class itself. Okay, so if I do print dog dot type, so basically whenever you initialize your function, your class, pardon me, whenever you initialize your class, Python runs this function and then makes it global. So with this self.name, now it becomes global. That's why we have this self inside here. So you can always reference this self.name. So you can do print self.name here. Okay, so before we do that, I just want to show you that it's global to the class. So if I do dog, this dog here dot name, and I save and run it, you see we get the name of the dog, Stone. This is global to this class itself. You can't access this outside of the class. You can't just print name to give you an error. Okay, so I'll leave you to try that out. And if I print, okay, so let's just do woof and then we're going to do dog name. So the woofs and their name. I'm going to delete this line here and I run it. You see we get woof stone. But if I remove this self from here, actually you don't need to use dog.name here. Since you are in this class, you won't be using dog.name, you just use self.name. I hope you understand that. Okay, if I run it now, we'll get an error because it's not my global variable. You just create a normal variable, so it's not global to this class. So to be able to make it global to this class, you need to do self.name. So if I run that now, you can see we get stone. So we are accessing this global variable from here, as you can see. So don't try doing dog.name here. It will give you an error at some point in time. Okay, so I don't want to start explaining how to give you error. Imagine you had multiple instances and you're using dog.name. Just think about that. Okay, so you see this is a global variable in your class and you need to always put yourself here. so you make it global, and yourself has to be the first parameter in every of your class methods. Cool. So now how do we imagine we want to give our dog imagine we want to give our dog a name from the beginning. You don't want to give it a default name like this, so we want to always pass a name to it. So the way you do it is by passing n here, or just like you have parameters, and then so whatever it passes, the amount after this an amount of parameters passes, the amount of things this this class is gonna be expect whenever you call it. So if I try running this class this way, let me delete this, and I try giving it a name called, let me give it sock. Okay, so then I try running this, we get an error because it said takes only one position and we have two were given. So what it was expecting was after this self, it's always then we pass whatever variable we want to give it. So dog name. Okay, so now whenever we pass sock, Python will interpret this sock with dog name. Remember, this self must always be there. So now we're gonna initialize our global variable to be dog.name, our class global variable. So now if I print dog.back, it's gonna give me ourselves the name of the dog. So if I do this, we're gonna get wolf sock. So I can keep changing dog of name and keep creating different dogs. Okay, so that's cool. That's all with classes. I hope you understand that. So that's just like a basic and introduction to what classes are, and with this you can explore more in Python and know more. I hope I'm not just missing anything. Okay, this init, I told you, it's an initializer. Then we have our dog, class of dog. Actually, you don't need to pass this, put this parentheses here. See the same thing anyway, you get the same result with the sock. And so that's it for classes, with the basics of classes. And maybe I'll begin a video. I think this will be the last video in this series, so you can explore more on Python. So if I keep going, it might become difficult. So explore more on Python. Maybe I'll create a series on object-oriented programming in Python. So thanks for watching. If you like the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out, guys.